Well, thank you, Trevor Oliver, and to Tom Danheiser, and most importantly to Bob Fukuda, who's the market director for engineering at Clear Channel Chicago, for getting me up on the air tonight on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett with a face for radio and a voice for print. I'll tell you this right off the bat. I did not want to miss this show tonight. Not just because this is the kind of show I would love to listen to, but because it's just so much fun to do. And even though I'm on the road in Chicago, we were able to pull it together to get a studio on so that we didn't have to miss this one. And it's going to be so interesting to get this update from Galen Cook. Now, you might remember Galen Cook has been on with us a couple of times now, and together we're kind of tracking down the true identity of D.B. Cooper, using the massive resources of Coast to Coast AM and Galen Cook, who is a former investigator, now a lawyer in Washington State. We started the show back in Thanksgiving weekend with a visit with Galen Cook on the weekend anniversary of the successful skyjacking of D.B. Cooper. And then we got a phone call from a family who said, you know what, that's Dad. And Galen Cook, who had already had a suspect that he liked a lot, even changed, had a 180, and was seriously looking at this particular suspect being offered by his family, because the man had passed and he had told individual members of his family that he was, in fact, D.B. Cooper, and showed them evidence to that effect. And the pictures say a lot. In fact, we'll get more on that coming up this hour on the website. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. But we're going to put something up on the website at coasttocoastam.com, a new photo where you can really see the similarities between the man whom the FBI identified as D.B. Cooper and this man who as of now shall remain nameless. But we'll talk more about that with Galen Cook and what more he's been able to figure out on this story. Plus, coming up a little bit later on in the show, Peter Von Puttkamer, he is the producer of at Griffin Productions. They do a lot of documentaries. He's been on the road investigating everything from Bigfoot to giant tarantulas to being in, these amazing caves to hunted circumstances to where people are doing the most bizarre things. And he's also been involved in these native rituals and every possible activity out there on the fringe. He's not only seen it, but he's participated in it, and we'll tell you more about his latest monster hunting expeditions coming up on Coast to Coast AM. Looking forward to that. But let's get started with some amazing crypto news. I think the most incredible story of this week, and it all sounds so familiar, plus the story of the manual which instructs firefighters on how to deal with a UFO invasion. Maybe you saw that tonight on the website. We'll tell you more about it in crypto news next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Again, Galen Cook with an important update coming up on the D.B. Cooper story, and I'm really loving where this is going. Wouldn't it be cool if we were able to break this story on Coast to Coast and finally solve the mystery of who was D.B. Cooper? We'll bring you up to speed on that coming up a little bit later on. First, in crypto news for tonight. By the way, can you hear me okay? Can you hear the thumping of the hip-hop music in the background? No one can hear that? I'm so glad. I'm doing this broadcast from a studio which is right next door to a late-night hip-hop station, which has a live DJ in the studio, and he's doing the whole McMaster thing with the discs flying. He's got two vinyl turntables going, and it's cool to watch. But he's really cranking the music up, and he's dancing, and there's all these people dancing literally about 8 feet from me, but it's separated by a wall and soundproof glass. I can feel the floor underneath me going thump, 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 thump. And I can even hear it when I take off my headphones, but apparently it's not coming through the processing, so we're in good shape. But if you were sitting there next to me, I swear it would be like being next to an apartment filled with a bunch of college kids going ape on some band I've never heard of that's already won 9 Grammys. You know how that works. All right, so as far as I'm concerned, the weirdest news story of this week in crypto news the reports that the Secret Service waived their protection of Barack Obama in Dallas. Now, that was the claim made by a police officer who went on the record to say he was told to stop screening people and let them come on in. Had you heard this update, though, that the U.S. Secret Service Friday denied reports that security measures at this Obama rally in Texas were relaxed or deviated from established plans. Secret Service spokesman Eric Zarin said that there was no order from the Secret Service to stop screening people going to the Obama rally Wednesday at the Dallas Reunion Arena. He said that the event's security plans did not involve having each participant pass through a magnometer, as may be the case with other events. So he's saying the fact that a police officer said that they were told to no longer put people through the metal detectors isn't unusual, because he said there was no rule that said that they all had to go through the metal detectors. Anyway, they go on to say, the Secret Service, any allegations to the fact that we had suspended screening or deviated from the original security plan would be entirely inaccurate. But how familiar does that sound, huh? The Secret Service denies telling the Dallas police to stand down on its security of a potential, Kennedy-like president. Some guy like that. I don't know. And then the sad story of the police officer who was killed on the motorcycle. The only way this story could get weirder is if that police officer's last name had been Tippett. From Phys.org.com, now it is possible to see a movie of an electron. The movie shows how an electron rides on a light wave after just having been pulled away from an atom. This is the first time an electron has ever been filmed, and the results are presented in the latest issue of Physical Review Letters. As important as the electron is, and this is the first time it's appearing on film, makes you wonder, doesn't it? How is it that an electron is just getting on the screen and Pauly Shore has already made all those movies? It just doesn't seem right. And this new movie with the electron already made more money than Paris Hilton's The Hottie and the Naughty. Sorry. Did you hear about that movie? Paris Hilton's movie, The Hottie and the Naughty, and its opening weekend, opening in like 2,000 theaters, made $9,000 or something. Some amazingly low amount. I'm sure they didn't cover that in Physical Review Letters. That's where this story is from. We've linked it up at the website, coasttocoastam.com. Physical Review Letters. Sounds like Penthouse Forum for scientists, doesn't it? Online tonight at the Daily Mail, also at the website, the story of Mavis Price. She's the 60-year-old grandmother who seems to have a freakishly high level of static electricity coursing through her veins. She estimates she has destroyed 15 tea kettles in the last few years. Housework is a problem, 20 irons, and 10 vacuum cleaners biting the dust after falling foul of her apparently supercharged touch. She's like Magneto without the helmet, I assume. Maybe she's got a helmet, too. And her friends and family are often left with hair standing on end after touching her. I should use that excuse. My wife asked me to vacuum. I should say, I'm sorry, I blow up vacuum cleaners. She also can't have a computer in her house, though, because they go berserk at the touch of her hand. You can find out more on that story online. I hope this woman is never allowed to wear corduroy pants. For God's sake, she could blow up half of England. And let's keep this statically charged grandmother out of Arizona, which is close to becoming the Persian Gulf of solar energy, according to CNN. A Spanish company is planning to take 3 square miles of desert southwest of Phoenix and turn them into one of the largest solar power plants in the world. The company, which has plants in Spain, Northern Africa, and other parts of the U.S., could begin construction as early as next year on this small, dusty town 50 miles southwest of Phoenix. The company said Thursday it could be online with solar energy by 2011. It's a $1 billion power plant. But again, like that, CNN describes it as the Persian Gulf of solar energy right here in the United States. Good thing that President Bush is leaving office, or we might end up having invaded ourselves somehow before it was over. Sorry. And then, speaking of Phoenix, The 600-page guide may lend credibility to UFO believers. It's in a story from a Phoenix TV station. You can find it at coasttocoastam.com. The Fire Officer's Guide to Disaster Control can apparently be found in firehouses across the U.S., though. It covers everything from fire and flood response to aviation disasters. Chapter 13 of the book has an unusual twist titled Enemy Attack and UFO Potential. It outlines what could happen in the event of a UFO crash. The authors of the book, retired firefighters, write in part, it would be remiss not to give some part to the role fire departments might play in the event of the unexpected arrival of UFOs in their communities. In a less optimistic scenario, you may have engine trouble upon approaching the scene. Radio contact could be lost with your dispatcher. If at night your headlights could go out, the city could be blacked out, and your portable generators may malfunction when you attempt to use them for fans and portable lights. For the sake of the first responders, I hope Chapter 14 of this manual is how not to get vaporized by their alien death rays. Because that always seems to happen in those movies. Remember, they like turn green, they glow, and then they're gone. And if you take a look online, I'll try and get the blog up a little bit later on this hour, too. Our guest is ready. Galen Cook is standing by with another breaking story. Well, at least of sorts, anyway. It's not the breaking story that we want, though, Galen, yet. The one where we take it to the FBI and we've proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that we know who D.B. Cooper is. But we're getting closer, aren't we?
Absolutely. By the way, pleasure to be back on your show, Ian.
I love having you on. I cannot wait to do this, because I think there is something about this story that seems so plausible. But you are our investigator in the field on this, Galen, so let's start from the beginning. You're talking about somebody that you like as being your prime suspect for D.B. Cooper. Then you were contacted by this family. Is the family still remaining nameless?
At this time, yes, and I want to compliment them. There's basically the widow and then three sons. The three sons are not related to the widow. The widow was a wife that came down the line later. But
a stepmom. That's
correct. But they've been coordinating with me, and we're doing this slowly and methodically. The family does not have an agenda, but they would like to know the truth, and that's why we're working steadily on this thing. And by the way, I don't know if you put it up on the website yet, but the latest evidence that I gave you is the exact same evidence I gave the FBI. So you and your listeners have the same thing the FBI has right now on this suspect.
All right, so we have a photo which is coming up in a few minutes, and that'll go up at coasttocoastam.com. Mm-hmm. And this is a new photo that also looks remarkably like the photo of the drawing made by the FBI's sketch artist.
That's correct. Actually, there's about 3 or 4, and I can't tell you which exactly. It's either 3 or 4 artist renderings that were produced in 1971 and 1972 of the suspect D.B. Cooper. And they were taken from actual eyewitnesses on the flight 305 on November 24th, 1971. They were probably taken from 2 of the flight attendants and the gentleman who was seated directly across the aisle from D.B. Cooper. So that they all look pretty much the same, but as everyone has a little different interpretation of what they remember seeing, they might vary a little bit, but they're all pretty close.
Now, let's go back before we go forward. The last time you were on, we had a photo sent by the family, and then we had the sketch by the FBI, and then we had somebody who was very kind, and their name escapes me. I don't know that I even kept it, who did a composite for us of those two things to show just how close they were. And we'll put that up, too, coming up in just a few minutes. And so you can see, again, just how if we just morphed the FBI sketch just ever so slightly, we have almost a dead ringer for the FBI sketch.
You have some ingenious listeners out there.
Aren't they talented?
Your audience is the greatest, I got to tell you, Ian. What he did really brings out the the essence of the D.B. Cooper lookalike.
All right, so we'll have that coming up in a few minutes. And then the new photograph. Now, but the last time you were on with us, we were talking about trying to find some of the other witnesses. One in particular was a flight attendant who had moved away, had changed her name, had gotten married. And had you had any luck hearing from anybody who knew who any of the other witnesses were?
Yes, I have. I have talked with one of the crew. There were 6 crew members from Northwest Airlines that night, 3 pilots and 3 flight attendants. I know where one flight attendant is, and I sent her the same picture that has been up on the web for about 6 weeks. She has not returned my calls yet, or excuse me, she has not returned the letter and the picture. So I don't know if she even received it, but she's not the principal witness I'm looking for. The one I'm looking for is Tina Mucklow. Now, I know a little something more about Tina, and I got that from another private investigator. Tina probably doesn't go by the name Mucklow anymore. She goes by Tina Larson. And something very odd I learned just a couple days ago. Tina has been hard to find, and she doesn't want to talk much about the case. Now, remember, this is a 37-year-old cold case, and the FBI is actively trying to wrap this case up. They've been on the news a lot in the last 4 or 5 months, as you well know. Turns out that Tina's brother-in-law is an FBI agent. So that might be part of the reason we're not having any luck locating Tina. And that's been confirmed to me by 2 different sources. Tina's brother-in-law was an FBI agent. But that might be why the FBI is keeping her under wraps? I wish I could answer that question. I don't know. Tina has had an interesting life since D.B. Cooper. She no longer works for the airline. She became a nun, and she was in a monastery down there in southern Oregon for a number of years. Quit that and moved down to San Diego, and we've lost track of her movement since then. Now, another investigator who I've been coordinating with on this case, and he's out of New York City, he's looking for Tina too, but we're not having any luck. Tina is the flight attendant who spent the most time on the plane with D.B. Cooper.
Okay, now let's just go over that for a second. We're looking for a former flight attendant, former nun, whose brother used to be in the FBI, and she lives in the San Diego area. How many of those could there actually be?
Well, I don't think she's in the San Diego area anymore, but she keeps to herself. Now, what's interesting is I looked on the Internet here a few weeks ago, and they actually have an old CBS black and white news clip. It's a Walter Cronkite clip that came out the night after the D.B. Cooper event. That would have been probably November 25th on 1971. And the newscaster in Reno, Nevada, tried to get an interview with Tina Mucklow, but Tina didn't want to say much. Well, she's still not saying much, and it's 37 years later. I want her to look at this black and white photo of my suspect, and I want to see if this jogs her memory and says, yeah, that's either the guy or it's not the guy. Right.
I think that's very key. Now, she might, of course, and this is sometime later, so it would be helpful maybe if in the classic police style we put 4 or 5 similar-looking photographs up there, too, if we can, and see whether or not she might be able to, if we ever had the opportunity. It would only help to bolster the case if out of those 4 or 5 she picked this guy who we'll call what? Main suspect number 1? What do we want to call him for the rest of the conversation?
Well, we'll just call him the suspect.
The suspect. Yeah. Okay. So that would be interesting, too, because that would only, after all these years, that would really help if she went, no, that's it. But, all right, so we're looking for Tina, former nun, former flight attendant, and we'll talk more about this here in just a second, because we're just about to put up, we'll hit the send button or enter or whatever we got to do here. We'll put up all the photographs we talked about at coasttocoastam.com so that everybody can see them for themselves. And then we'll continue this conversation coming up with Galen Cook. And you know what? We'll probably hold on till after a little bit into the next hour, too, if that's all right, Galen, so we can get some phone calls in for you. But we'll give you the latest that we know, all of the new things we've heard from the family, and we'll go over the story that you're going to want to hear as we continue to try to track down the real D.B. Cooper, and you're hearing it live on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. All right, so it's Coast to Coast AM with Ian Punnett, and we're in our first hour here. I'm just about to check the website at coasttocoastam.com. If it's not up yet, it will be very shortly. The photographs we were just talking about, new evidence from the family of the man we're calling the prime suspect in the D.B. Cooper successful skyjacking. We'll go over a little bit of the history again. I want to talk about the DNA evidence and find out what more Galen Cook, who's an investigator turned attorney in Washington State, has been able to find out since he was last on the air with us. And you'll see another photograph of the man, including the composite drawing that was done of the original sketch by the FBI, morphed slightly by a listener to include the physical features of the man who is the prime suspect we're talking about tonight on coasttocoastam.com. If not now, then shortly. And more on this conversation coming up on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Well, I love the work that Galen Cook is doing with us here on this D.B. Cooper story, which we've been a part of. And this is really cool, the new stuff. And thank you to Sean for getting it up on the website, too, at coasttocoastam.com. You go in there right now and you see what we're talking about. Another photograph provided by the family of the person we're calling our prime suspect. And in this new photograph, we're seeing all sorts of things. Primarily, just we can look at this at the headshot. If we just isolated the face of the suspect and looked at that with the original FBI composite drawing, we really see even there kind of a greater similarity maybe than even in the other shot, particularly in the chin and in the cheeks, where it's really eerily like the FBI drawing in this new photograph. Don't you think, Galen?
Yeah, it certainly is, Ian. I've got the photo right in front of me now. The first photo was taken in 1971, and this shows the suspect in his military fatigues. And
right.
He was active Army in that time. The new photo that just went up on your site moments ago shows him in his dress uniform. And what it doesn't show, I cropped the picture, what it doesn't show is the Brigadier General pinning an award on his left shirt pocket. And the award he's being given is the MSM, or the Meritorious Service Medal. And I believe just days after he got this medal, he retired permanently from the military. And this picture right here was taken in early August of 1973 at Fort Lewis, Washington. Fort Lewis is a Army command post located about 35 miles south of SeaTac Airport, and that's, of course, where the famous D.B. Cooper skyjacking took place.
And where we think he was originally trying to get to, because he wanted, when the plane took off, he wanted the back stairs to be lowered already on takeoff so that he could jump out right away.
Well, that's my theory and the theory of others. I don't think he necessarily wanted to or planned on dropping right in on his barracks. But
no, but as opposed to, I mean, to be closer, saves him a walk and saves
Sure.
him a hitchhike or however he thought he was going to get back to the base.
He wanted to jump out in territory he at least had some familiarity with. Now, what I want your listeners and viewers to concentrate on is something very important on this picture, and that's the reason I put the picture up. It's not so much because of the headshot. We've seen the headshot. And by the way, you mentioned something that's important on this, and that's the chin. You notice the chin has gotten a little thicker in this 1973 photo from as compared to the 1971 photo. And that's something I've been looking at. In fact, I have other pictures of this suspect in age progression, and I'll share those with you at a later date. But he definitely grew a little bit of a chin.
Well, I can see where the jowls are coming down a little bit as he's gotten older, but it's I mean, I want to point out, I know this sounds like we're, maybe microanalyzing this, but I think it's really interesting. If you look at the FBI composite drawing, you see how prominent the chin is on the drawing, right?
Yes.
And then you see the shading that they gave the suspect's face, which, was probably just to highlight his gauntness or to reflect, the light that they thought. But it also seems to imply a kind of swarthiness in his original face. Now, we don't know until we talk to the people who were standing there who were telling the FBI sketch artist what was significant about that shading on the side of his face. But it seems to imply a kind of swarthy aspect of his complexion, because that shading isn't as dark on other parts of his face. And then you look at the new photograph that you put up, and you see that chin line follows almost the exact outline that the original FBI sketch does.
It's a terrific observation you're making, Ian, and it's also pertinent to this case. There's something about the composite drawings of D.B. Cooper that around the chin and the neckline that are a little mysterious. And if you look at the photos that I've received from the family members, you'll notice that there is something about the chin. In fact, I talked with the widow, and she's mentioned this a few times too. The hairline is almost perfect to a T. The ears are absolutely right
Perfect.
On the money.
Exactly.
The age lines below his nose, even around his lips, are, I'd say, just about perfect. One area that I've always had a little bit of trouble with are his eyebrows. D.B. Cooper, without the sunglasses, at least in the artist rendition, shows a little bit thinner eyebrows, where my suspect's eyebrows are a little thicker and not quite as long. But I don't think that's as significant as other features.
Because he could have gone to, literally, before the sketch was done, before he did the jump, he could have been at a barber, and my barber thins out my eyebrows every time I go in. So, that's not that unusual. That's not a characteristic that's kind of hard and fast, obviously.
That's right. Now, what I want your listeners and viewers to look at is the second picture or the second photo, and I want them to look above the left pocket, and you'll notice the award ribbons. There's 3 rows of them. And then I want them to look at the little insignia. It's actually a medal, and it's located directly above the ribbons. Now, I had to use a magnifying glass to see this, but when I was going through some of the material that the family had forwarded on to me, I had to use a magnifying glass. And this thing, when it appeared in the magnifying glass, I'll tell you, I just about did a backflip. What it is it's a little medallion that's pinned above the ribbons, and it's the jump wings. Now, let me tell you what it depicts, because some people don't have magnifying glasses handy.
Sure.
It's an open canopy parachute with wings going from the top of the canopy down to the lower end of the parachute. I call them wings. Some people said they actually look more like wreaths, but I've talked to people who both are active and retired in the U.S. Army, and they said those are actually called jump wings. Now, back in in the 60s and the 70s, anyone who had paratrooper training and a certain number of jumps under their belt was awarded this particular jump wing. So in fact, this suspect we have had parachute experience.
Now, this is important because we talked about the whole high altitude, low opening thing last time, and I thought this was significant that there was no particular halo uniform insignia at the time that this photograph was taken.
That's correct. I want to make sure this is very clear. I had to talk with some people who were in the military, and they told me that the halo looks a little bit like the jump wings, except there's a star above the open canopy. And the halo medal wasn't actually developed until either the late 80s or the 90s. There were halo jumpers, but they didn't have a halo insignia in the 60s and 70s. And from talking with several of the sons of this suspect, they remember quite distinctly their father training doing night halo jumps in the military.
Now, they remember him when he was doing the jumps, or that he talked about it?
Nope. I talked with the oldest son, who's now in his mid to latter 50s, and he said when he was a kid, probably in 7th or 8th grade, he remembered his dad having to go out on night maneuvers, and they were living in California at the time, and they were doing night halo jumps. He distinctly remembers that.
Now, do we know, we have it confirmed yet that this particular suspect was at the base near Seattle at the time of the successful skyjacking of that flight?
It's a good question, and it goes directly to the heart of the case, Ian. This is what I've been able to find. This suspect, I'm actually looking at a good part of his military record right now. Through the Freedom of Information Act, I requested the DD-214 form, which is the discharge papers that give pretty much the entire military history of a person. This suspect joined the military at age 16 in 1946, and he started out in the Air Force. He later took an honorable discharge from, back then it was called the Army Air Force. Then he joined the Marines in 1955, and he served in the Marines until, I'm looking at the record here, he received an honorable discharge from the U.S. Marine Corps in 1964. And then that same year, he joins the United States Army. So he served in 3 different branches of the military.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. And then now his record is nebulous from 1965 to 1967. That's why I'm still pursuing this, because I can't find accurate information to show what he did during those years. However, in 1968, he was in Fort Ord with the Army. And he received several letters of commendation, too, from the military, so he served honorably. Now, to get to the date that we need, which is 1971, in 1970, he took an honorable discharge from the U.S. Army. Now, get this. In 1971, he became an ROTC instructor. And I'm not going to say where right now, but he became an ROTC instructor with the U.S. Army, and he served as an ROTC instructor for 2 years. For those people that don't know what that is, that's Reserve Officers Training Corps. So he was basically teaching at a major college, which has an Army ROTC unit, and that's what he did. So in 1971, which is the critical year, he was an ROTC instructor, and I'm not going to say whether he was in Washington State or not, but the 1973 photo, which is up on the web now, that shows him receiving his last award, was taken at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Now, you're going to have to pardon me here, but I need to know why you're leaving that specifically blank, when seemingly this is what it would hang on.
Yeah, I understand, but if I give you the name of the college where he was teaching at, it could be checked quickly, I think, and the name could be determined. And I still have a duty to protect the name for the family's interest. So I'm doing the best I can. I'd love to give the name, but I told the family I wouldn't until the FBI had a chance to look at this evidence and make a decision whether or not this was the guy or was not. Okay,
but why can't you tell us whether or not he was in the Seattle area?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you this. He was not in the Seattle area.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you what. He was in Utah. He was in Utah. He was teaching. He was an ROTC Army instructor in Utah. But
on the night of the jump, he was assigned to some ROTC location in Utah.
This is where it gets dicey. The youngest son told me that his father had already split up with his mother at that time. However, the son and the mother were living in Utah. The father, this is the suspect now, was not living with them. But you got to remember, this D.B. Cooper jump took place on Thanksgiving Eve, and it's very possible that he had made a trip up to Washington State, more specifically the Seattle area, and had business up there. And the reason he had business up there is because this particular ROTC sponsored unit, or this ROTC college, was under the jurisdiction of Fort Lewis. So he would have business in Fort Lewis, Washington. Fort Lewis is
Sure.
the regional headquarters for all the Western ROTC colleges.
The plot
so
thickens.
you start putting it together,
Yeah.
and it does fit. It's now what he was doing up there on Thanksgiving, I don't know, but the son did tell me this, that the father at that time had already split up with the mom and wasn't living at home. So if you put yourself into this mindset where you're going to go back and look at what would someone be doing the night before Thanksgiving, and then why didn't someone show up to the dinner table on Thanksgiving? Well, in this case, it wouldn't matter because the father was already living on his own.
Well, and let's go back to a little bit. If he had conceived of this plan, right, prior to Thanksgiving, prior to the family breaking up, he might, if this is what he did, if the prime suspect is D.B. Cooper, you don't deviate from the plan and now change it and try to transpose this very successful plan that you've got all worked out to be happening in Utah. Maybe you just stay with plan A. You've got a buddy that you're gonna stay with at the fort. You could rack up with a friend who's got a place there, and he's none the wiser. And you've got, some sort of reason to be there, and you just go back to plan A. And then you show up days later, later on the weekend or something like that, and visit the kids on Thanksgiving weekend and get your life started up all over again.
He had familiarity with the Seattle area. Now, I'm going to open up the door to something. It's highly speculative, but it's eerie. And here's what happened about 6 months after the D.B. Cooper jump. There was a guy named Richard Floyd McCoy who did the same exact thing with the United Airlines flight, Denver to Los Angeles. And he hijacked the 727, and he collected $500,000 and some parachutes and jumped out. And it took the FBI about 3 days, but they did nail him. Well, this guy was from Utah, and he was also in the military. He was in the Army, and he was also a paratrooper. And you start looking at these things, and you wonder, now, this is rather interesting. We got a couple guys here who were down in Utah, but did they know each other? They weren't the same age, I can tell you that. But there may be some mysterious connection here.
Yeah. That's now, I don't know, why not open that up? I mean, heck, who knows where that'll lead? Right?
I'm trying to focus on one, not two, but it's an interesting connection that probably needs to be examined a little more closely.
All right, and we'll do that, too, coming up in the next half hour. You can give us some more time, right, Galen?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, then here's what I want to do. Coming at the top of the hour, we'll give you the numbers, and I'd love to focus on the photograph, and in particular, as you talk about the suspect's jump wings. And we have a couple of things that are kind of on the table. First of all, we might wonder, without giving away his name again, out of respect to the family and as cooperative as they've been, and to the FBI part of the investigation, we might wonder, does this guy look familiar? Did you serve with this guy? Could he have been your ROTC instructor? Were you there at Fort Lewis in Washington in 1971? Is there anything that you could add to this conversation just based on the photograph? And then we'll go back up to the composite drawings as well. And I don't know whether this would be helpful or not, but I've been sort of curious as to what that composite sketch that we have might look like to somebody with the trained eye of a sketch artist.
Very good. Ian, one more thing. Don't forget there's a second piece of evidence up there that I want you to comment on, too.
Well, and we'll get to that, too, in the next half hour, because I was curious about the whole blood group O and the whole thing and what all of that meant. As you scroll down here, you'll see the photographs, and then you'll see at the bottom, you'll see a little document, which we haven't gotten to yet, but which we will coming up with Galen Cook. But again, if you happen to be a former police sketch artist, I'm just kind of curious, since we can't yet talk to the woman who gave the police that evidence or gave the police the suggestions for what should go into the composite, knowing what you know about composite sketches versus what photographs actually, look like of the person that the police are looking for, what is it that you think that flight attendant might have been telling the sketch artist? When you see what's up there, what was it she's saying, do you think, if you were a sketch artist, that you end up with that composite? And then how does that play into what we have on the photographs to the right? Go take a live from Chicago, and thanks again to Bob Fukuda, who helped arrange this accommodation, also to Trevor Oliver and to everybody at Premier for making this happen. On the road, do a little vacation time, but couldn't miss this show tonight with Galen Cook. We'll get to your phone calls. And I guess we took a couple of calls from people saying, you know what, I really don't know the D.B. Cooper story. And we did sort of launch into the latest episode without going back and doing the layout. So we'll do that in a minute here, just for people that don't know who D.B. Cooper is or the story behind it. It'll help flesh out the evidence that we have up online tonight at coasttocoastam.com. We haven't gotten to all of it, but we will. And you heard us. We're asking for people who can help us both track down the flight attendant, anybody that might have a reflection on this photograph of who we're thinking of as the prime suspect tonight of D.B. Cooper. We're not giving his name out of respect to the family and to the FBI investigation. We'll talk about the fingerprints and a little bit more about what's in the photograph as seen through the eyes of Galen Cook. By the way, I just want to give a shout out to my homies in the studio next door. Mentioned last hour that there was a hip hop show going on here, and they had a live DJ that was playing thumpity thump music and doing the whole live vinyl deal. It was cool. And out in the hallway, getting a drink of water, I was given a copy of their demo. So thank you to DJ Cranksta for this demo, and I'll tell you what's on it here. There's just 2 tracks. Top Dollar Ho is one of them, and Naked and Baked is the other track on here. And I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced. It may be Naked and Baked. I don't know. I haven't heard it yet. Maybe they rhyme, or maybe it's Naked and Baked. But it'll be interesting. It gives me something to listen to on my way home from church later on this morning. And we'll get to your calls next for Galen Cook as we continue to track down what might be the real man behind the story of D.B. Cooper. And don't think we've forgotten about him. We're looking forward to Peter Puttkamer coming up. Peter Von Puttkamer, sorry. And we'll be talking about his latest exploits as a monster hunter. And I don't know, if I was Peter, I'd be seriously thinking about doing a documentary about this next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Well, before we get into the calls, and hang on, Mark and Paul, and to other people, too, who want to join in this conversation, we could probably step back a little bit and give a primer for those who are unfamiliar with the story of D.B. Cooper with Galen Cook. So, Galen, with special attention paid to some of the things we've already talked about and why they're significant tonight on the website, do you want to just give a quick sketch?
Sure. By the way, I had a 4-hour telephone interview with a gentleman named William Radicek last week, and I want to say hi to Bill. He lives out in Minneapolis. He was the co-pilot on board Flight 305 that night, and he actually talked to D.B. Cooper using the airplane's interphone system. And he corrected me on a few things, but I learned a lot of things that aren't published about this event, and I'd be glad to talk to you about that at some future date.
Good. All right. Well, let's roll through just for people to get an idea, a quick timeline of the D.B. Cooper story. Yeah,
it's November 24th, 1971. It's Thanksgiving Eve. This gentleman dressed up in a suit and tie, very conservative-looking gentleman, carrying a briefcase and wearing a long raincoat, comes into the Portland International Airport, that's Portland, Oregon, buys a one-way ticket from Portland to Seattle, gets on board the plane. Before the plane even takes off, he hands a note to Florence Schaffner, one of the flight attendants, and basically the note says, I've got a bomb on board, do what I say and nothing will happen. She takes the note up to the pilots. The pilots decide this is real, and they basically are at the mercy of D.B. Cooper, who wants 4 parachutes and $200,000 cash at the SeaTac airport, and then the plane can land and release its 36 passengers. And that's exactly what happens. It's a little more involved than just that. This is the quickie version. Plane takes off out of SeaTac about 7:30 p.m. that night. Remember, this is Thanksgiving Eve. with 4 parachutes, $200,000 in cash, all in 20s, and the 3 pilots up in the cockpit and 1 flight attendant, Tina Mucklow. They set a course for Reno, Nevada, which is going to be a first fueling stop on the way to Mexico City. This is a hijacked airliner, Flight 305 Northwest Airlines. At about 8:11 p.m., and somewhere near the Columbia River, which separates Washington State from Oregon, the crew up front felt what they call a pressure bump because the aircraft was only flying at 10,000 feet as instructed by D.B. Cooper, so that D.B. Cooper could slip on a parachute and jump out with $200,000. And that's exactly what he did. Now, it gets a little complicated because he ordered 4 parachutes, 2 front and 2 back, hoping that with those parachute deliveries, he'd get some D-rings so he could connect the front and the back. The front is the reserve chute. The back is the main chute. He goes out with an NB-8 Navy emergency backpack that apparently worked, but he also took a front chute that didn't work. And whether he knew the difference or whether he was going to use that chute for some other purpose, we may never know. But that's one of the stumbling blocks for the FBI is they can't understand why a guy who had experienced parachuting would jump out with the reserve chute that was stitched up and had an X over it. Needless to say, 9 years later, a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old kid named Brian Ingram was on the bank of the Columbia River in Washington State near Vancouver and found some of the $20 bills that Cooper had taken. So we knew for sure that at least the money got to the ground, and I guess D.B. Cooper did too. And the big question is, did he get away with it? Did he die in the jump, or exactly what happened? And it's a 37-year-old mystery that the FBI can't close. They've had over 1,000 suspects, some good, most of them were not good as far as suspects go, but it's an open case today and one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in FBI history.
Let's go over some of what we learned last time when we had this conversation that's seemingly insignificant things, except when you tie it together with this suspect, this guy we have up at the website at coasttocoastam.com, whose family had contacted you after the appearance we had together back in Thanksgiving, that this guy's brother, this prime suspect's brother, was named Dan. Is that what it was? That's
correct. He had a brother named Dan, who's also deceased now, and the actual name D.B. Cooper is actually, it's a misnomer. The gentleman or the suspect who hijacked the plane gave the name of Dan Cooper when he purchased a ticket in Portland. And on the flight manifest, they only used the first initial back then, so it was D. Cooper. And at SeaTac Airport, as the passengers were deplaning, the FBI had to take an accounting of all the passengers, and the only one who didn't get off the plane was initial D. Cooper. And so basically what happened is now they're in the middle of a hijacking, and they're trying to figure out who this guy D. Cooper is, and he boarded in Portland. Well, what happened was the sheriff's department down in Portland, they were checking their files, and it turned out there was a guy named D.B. Cooper that lived in Portland who had some kind of a criminal record. So they were looking at him as a suspect while the hijacking's still going on. This is up in Seattle, and it got released inadvertently to a UPI reporter that the hijacker might be D.B. Cooper. Well, the hijacker never gave the name D.B. Cooper. He only gave the name Dan Cooper. But, as they say, the rest is history, and
right.
D.B. Cooper
just kind of stuck. Right.
Yeah.
Now, and interestingly enough, did the family reflect on the significance of the last name Cooper? Did that ever come up anywhere in your conversation?
No.
Like, was there an aunt or anybody named Cooper?
No, that's a mystery why he picked Cooper. It might be a mystery why he picked Dan, but he did have an older brother named Dan.
Yep.
That's the record, and Dan is now deceased, too. Another thing we were looking at, and we're still looking at, is whether or not there was a ground accomplice to complete this hijacking. The military, the way they're trained, and I certainly I didn't serve as a paratrooper, so I wouldn't know for certain. But it seems like to pull this thing off and really get away with it, he might have needed some ground support. And so there's always been a question as whether or not there was an accomplice somewhere that could be waiting or maybe had some kind of advanced radio system where he could be picked up. It's speculative. I do know from one of the sons that this suspect, this D.B. Cooper suspect that we're looking at, had a lot of survival training and was certainly capable of staying out in the woods for as long as he needed to stay out of cover.
All right, so take a look online again at coasttocoastam.com, and you'll see the photographs. We've been talking about a composite sketch drawing done by the FBI, 2 photographs supplied by the family of this person who they believe indicated to them that this fit their father, indicated to you that this fit their father, so that things like the fact that he liked to wear suits, he liked to wear a kind of suit just like he was D.B. Cooper was pictured in, and that his military record is consistent with all of the aspects of this story. And we've talked about a lot about the last half hour. Let's get to a couple of people, and then we'll get to the bit at the end of the page here at coasttocoastam.com and the significance of the thumbprint, etc. But first, Mark, east of the Rockies in New York, on Coast to Coast AM for Galen Cook, the investigator who has been leading this. Mark?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Where are you with this? Anything you can help us with?
Well, I've got 2 questions, and I hope it really rattles some people's brains and brings them into this conversation. First, you guys were talking about, Galen was talking about how money was found. That was my first question. Where was it found and how was it found? And are those serial numbers traceable? First question. Second question is, if you're going to jump from a plane like that over the Northwest, over all that forested area, are you not going to get hung up in the trees somewhere? And why has not anyone looked up above, perhaps, to see if there's maybe a parachute or human remains up in a tree somewhere?
Well, they certainly look, but it's a huge area. But Galen, onto the money part.
Sure. The money was all in 20s, and it had been photographed by the FBI, and actually this money was on standby for a kind of a ransom in waiting, if you will. If the FBI ever needed to do something similar to this, they'd have money that had been photographed already. And so they had all the serial numbers of every bill. In fact, I have a publication with the serial number of each bill. And so when this young kid, this 8-year-old kid, found the money on the banks of the river, they took it to Ralph Himmelsbach, who was the lead FBI agent in Portland. And the first thing he did was pull out his magnifying glass and match up the numbers. He said, yep, that's Cooper's money.
Right away.
Absolutely. It just took him 5 minutes, and he said, you found some of Cooper's booty. Now, to answer Mark's second question, I'm going to do it in 2 parts. There has never, ever been anything else found relating to this D.B. Cooper jump except the money. And that's kind of odd, considering all the people that go out in the woods and recreate and hunt in the Pacific Northwest.
Sure.
Now, one more thing I want to tell Mark is this. He makes a good point about a 28-foot parachute canopy getting hung up on the trees, and how could this guy ever get out of it? Well, you know what? In Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, that's how they inserted paratroopers north of the DMZ. They made jumps at night, and they inserted, and these guys knew they would get hung up in thick canopies, jungle canopies, and they had to be skilled enough to be able to get out of that and get down in the ground and be safe. So the military training would have taken care of that.
And again, that's part of the photograph that we've got online tonight that shows you he had that military training, and so he might have also had the training to avoid being hung up in the trees, and that's the other part of this, is skilled as a high altitude, low opening parachutist. that he might know exactly what not to do as well. And let's go to Paul, west of the Rockies in Nevada on Coast to Coast AM. Paul, have you looked at the photographs we've got up there at coasttocoastam.com?
Oh, yes, I have. But, real quick to answer your last question as well, D.B. Cooper and so did Richard Floyd McCoy, they gave exact flight coordinates to the pilots via the flight crew. So he knew exactly where he was jumping. He led him on a wild goose chase. He knew exactly where he wanted to jump. He's a very smart guy. I looked at the photographs. Doesn't look like D.B. Cooper at all. He looks too old. His nose is too wide, and he also looks maybe more of Eastern European descent, where D.B. Cooper, by the sketch, looks more of a Celtic ancestry. But here, if you believe the book, D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, it's very compelling evidence by that author, and the book was published in 1991.
Stop right here. Wait. Stop right here. Just so you don't think that we haven't had the McCoy discussion before. Okay. Go ahead, Galen.
Yeah, I read the book, and I talked for an hour on the phone with the author of the book. That's Russ Callum. He was the lead FBI agent out of the Salt Lake City office, and he does stand by his theory that Richard Floyd McCoy was D.B. Cooper. However, he can't answer the following questions, and I asked him, and he doesn't have an answer for it. Number one, we know that the real D.B. Cooper on Flight 305 smoked cigarettes. He smoked at least half a pack of cigarettes during that flight. Richard Floyd McCoy did not smoke. He was a strict Mormon. Number two, there's evidence to show that Richard Floyd McCoy was in Southern California on November 24th, 1971. And I brought both of these actualities up to Mr. Callum, and a very nice gentleman, by the way, a gentleman in his mid-80s now, but he could not provide me with an answer on that. He thought maybe the cigarettes were a decoy. I have a hard time with that myself.
Yeah, no, I could believe it'd be a decoy because he also wore makeup and a disguise. But now here's what the evidence that says Richard McCoy was D.B. Cooper. He does the same exact hijacking 4 months later, same Boeing 727 with the AFT stairs. He gets away with it initially. He looks identical to the sketch. He attended BYU. And by the way, D.B. Cooper left behind a Brigham Young medallion with Richard McCoy's initials.
No, hold on, stop right here for a second. Galen?
Never heard of that before.
Never heard of that before.
No. And also, I have to tell the caller one thing. I talked 4 hours with the pilot, one of the pilots on Flight 305, and I asked him specifically if D.B. Cooper, who hijacked the flight up there in Seattle, whether or not he gave specific instructions as to where to fly, and he said no. He said D.B. Cooper said, take me to Mexico City, and that's all he said. There were no specific flight instructions as to which path to follow or which route to take. The only instructions he gave the cockpit crew was fly at 10,000 feet, keep your flaps at 15 degrees, and don't exceed 180 miles an hour. That's it.
Well, and let's be clear about this, too. The FBI has eliminated McCoy.
Yeah. You talk to any of the FBI agents, either retired or active, and they all will say the same thing. Richard Floyd McCoy was not D.B. Cooper. And
God bless you, Paul, for making the case. Every time we talk about this, somebody calls up as though this has never been brought up before. So we know, and that's significant. Now, as to what you said before about it doesn't look anything like him, I think remember that this is a sketch. It's not a photograph. And that the thing about the nose, do people really pay that much attention to the width of somebody's nose?
Richard Floyd McCoy was 28 years old when he hijacked the United flight. All the people who saw D.B. Cooper said he was a man in his 40s. And
that would be perfect. We'll come back next, though. More calls as we sort this out on Coast to Coast AM. And we are on the trail of the real D.B. Cooper. We may have a suspect that the FBI has been interested in. We've been talking about that with Galen Cook. I want to find a little bit more out about what the FBI has been telling Galen in just a second as we've been presenting this data on the air. It sure helps make this suspect look like a more likely candidate to be the real D.B. Cooper. But we're still in the stages, the investigative stages. We'll talk about the fingerprints here in just a second. We'll also talk about the DNA that they have, what the family is offering to the FBI to help determine whether or not their father was D.B. Cooper. And I want to have Galen, too, go over the details that the family has told them about why they said their father claimed he was D.B. Cooper. And then your calls, too. And we'll get to that coming up with Peter von Puttkamer, who's been kind enough to delay being on until the top of the hour. But we'll get to the Monster Hunter, I promise you. And I'm super looking forward to that, too. So it's going to be a great night ahead. Don't miss a minute. Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Galen Cook, former investigator turned attorney who's still investigating D.B. Cooper. And let's just go over, too, before the end of this hour, all the things that we're looking for. Kind of a shot in the dark, but who knows? Maybe somebody knows something. But let's go east of the Rockies first. Bob is in Pennsylvania on Coast to Coast AM for Galen Cook. Bob, have you been to the website? Have you looked at the new evidence that's up there?
Actually, I haven't had a chance to yet. I'm working as a police officer, and I'm out on the road right now. I can't wait to get back in the office and take a look.
Thank you.
But my question for Galen, I know he was trying to track down the flight attendants to have a question about the descriptions and the photos. Was he able to track down the actual sketch artist at all?
Yeah, that is one of those things we'd be curious about. Galen?
Yeah, it's a good question the officer brings up. I have not actually talked to him. I've got a couple names. I think there were more than one sketch artist involved, because like I said before, there were 3 or 4 different renditions that circulate around, and they all look just a little bit different. But when you look at them in a general way, they're all the same. But to answer the officer's question, no, I have not talked to the author of the sketches.
You know, it is a curiosity, and there have been many great examples of suspects caught who, when you look at the actual photograph and then compare it to the sketch, you see how close the sketch artist got. But it's never like photorealism. It's not an exact match, but there are things always about the sketch that are evocative of the subject.
You have to have something to go on,
sure.
Go with, Ian, and obviously, if this kind of thing didn't work, they would never put it out there, and it's not a slam dunk. But I think when you look at the suspect photo that we have up on Coast to Coast, you'll see that it's probably better than any others that have been offered before. Going back to Richard Floyd McCoy for a minute, if you look at his photo, and there's plenty of photos of him, you can get them on the web. I don't think he looks like D.B. Cooper, at least according to the artist sketch. There might be some very vague similarities, but when you look at it close, the ears are very different, the jawline is different, but I want to say one thing about not the officer's call, but the previous call when he brought up the Richard Floyd McCoy name. There's something very weird about this case that D.B. Cooper would have a Utah connection, and Richard Floyd McCoy absolutely lived in Utah. In fact, he parachuted down not too far from his house in Utah, and he served both in the active military in the 60s and then later as a Guard unit member. And I'm just wondering if maybe the real D.B. Cooper and Richard Floyd McCoy didn't know each other, or maybe they were in
sure.
the same paratrooping command or something. There's a strange connection there.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, of course, too, again, you go back to saying, I wonder whether there could have been somebody who was providing ground help to D.B. Cooper. The FBI has always wondered whether there was an accomplice. Is it so far out of the question to wonder whether or not somebody like that would have been on the ground to help him, and then he would have in turn helped them, pull off their own job?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that the family that we've talked to about this point out that there's something really consistent about this with the problem that their father had gambling.
Yeah, that's been told to me several times. He had a very bad habit of gambling and never had the financial resources around to do certain things with his family. So you can certainly look at that as a motive. He also was able to keep his mouth shut, something Richard Floyd McCoy was not able to do, and that's what led to his arrest. He talked about his heroics jumping out of an airplane with $500,000, and the FBI nailed him 2 days after that. But D.B. Cooper apparently didn't talk, and my suspect talked very little, but he did tell all the family members, and not on numerous occasions, but several times, that he was D.B. Cooper, and let it go with that. He didn't want to make a big deal of it, but he did indicate with certain things. And one of the shows that we did earlier, Ian, you said you predicted that D.B. Cooper might be found in 2008, and the answer to the whole puzzle might end up in a shoebox. And I got to thinking about that, and what I'm looking for is a gray briefcase that my suspect had, and we can't locate it. Now, the widow is trying to help me locate it, but she told me this. She said one time her husband had this gray colored briefcase that looked like a normal businessman's briefcase, and opened it, and she said she distinctly remembers seeing some $20 bills in there. She said, I remember seeing $20 bills, but we're looking for that briefcase. There's a couple of places where it might be. The suspect is deceased now, but apparently he left some of his personal effects in different places, so we still have a hunt to find that as further evidence to this case.
Let's get Tom in from Washington, west of the Rockies, on Coast to Coast AM. Tom?
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you this evening?
Very
Couldn't
good,
be
Tom.
better.
And Ian, as usual, very good show.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Two questions for Mr. Cook. Mr. Cook, I'm currently on active duty in the military, and by my experience, usually Halo guys are usually special operations or alerts detachments. Was your Mr. Cooper, the suspect, was he in any special operations or alerts type unit while he was in the military?
I can't ascertain that yet. What I did was I went through all of the military discharge papers that the family sent me. They sent me a whole bunch of stuff, and in a few minutes, Ian's going to bring out that last piece of evidence. That was something buried, and that's why I gave it to Ian. I thought it was it would carry probative value. But to answer your question, I haven't been able to determine that through records. Now, one of the sons tells me that he remembers his dad doing halo jumps at night somewhere near Fort Ord, California, and these were training missions before he went to Vietnam. He apparently served at least 2 tours in Vietnam. So without seeing the actual records from a DD-214 form, I can't tell you, but I would say there's a high probability of it.
Very good. And the second question is, now, when you said he had 4 parachutes with him, or he was given 4 parachutes, now, from my experience, you got a square, which is much more maneuverable, a paracommander, which is semi-maneuverable, and your tactical round chute, which is what, like the 80-second jumps. Which chute did he go out of the plane with?
He ordered 4 chutes. He wanted 2 front and 2 back, and the FBI, they had to scramble around the Seattle area to find them. They were finally located at a skydiving school in Renton, Washington, which is very close to SeaTac Airport.
Mm-hmm. I know it well.
Yeah, and they delivered the 4 chutes. The actual flight attendant went off the plane, brought the chutes back on the board, on the plane. Cooper figured out real quick which one he wanted. He wanted the NB-8, which was a Navy emergency chute, full canopy, 28-foot canopy.
Okay.
And it was the least maneuverable of the chutes you have mentioned. However, it was the military chute that he would be most likely familiar with.
Yeah, I've jumped 28-foot rounds, and those things are stone cold hard to try to maneuver. So yeah. I'm wondering if he didn't go into trees and break his neck somewhere.
Well, the guys that inserted behind enemy lines in Vietnam in the 60s, they used those kinds of chutes too, and they were able to get through that dense jungle and get back safely on the ground. So they must have had some training on how to avoid trees or how to get out of the chute if they got hung up.
And the only thing I could think of is, like you said, is that maybe somebody was on the ground giving him a hand to help him get out of a tree if that's what he went into. Unless they saw a rope wrapped around his body or something like that.
It's an interesting speculation. That the one key piece of evidence, of course, are the $20 bills found along the river.
Yeah, that fascinates me.
Yeah, and the prevailing thinking among FBI agents is that he never successfully lived when he hit the ground. He probably died before he hit the ground or when he hit the ground, and they said that the money is evidence of that. However, I heard an interesting bit of information is that he actually tried to tip 2 of these flight attendants for doing such a good job, and he pulled out a couple of wads of 20s. These 20s were rubber banded in $2,000 packets, and he tried to give each of the flight attendants $2,000 as a tip, and none of them would accept it. And the story I heard was he put the money not back in the satchel that was provided by the FBI, but into his raincoat. And so if he jumped out of an airplane going about 100, that the money could have flown out of the raincoat. Exactly.
Yeah, that's kind of ironic because I was actually in high school when that kid found that money on the beach up there. And kind of
Tom, I appreciate your unique perspective on that, and thanks for jumping in. Let's go first time caller line. Jim is in Arizona on Coast to Coast AM for Galen Cook for just a few more minutes. Jim?
Good evening, Galen. How are you doing?
Very good, Jim. Thank you.
I'm a private investigator myself out of Southern Arizona, and without any access to your files, you just verified something I discussed with the screener a moment ago. In these pictures, I see the gentleman is wearing Vietnam service medal with at least two successive decorations there, which indicates, like you said, 2 tours in Vietnam. My question was, have you, I'll give you the question and just a quick comment afterwards. Have you possibly done a Freedom of Information Act if the family cannot verify his whereabouts, much like the other gentleman indicated, if he was involved in special ops, there's a good possibility, was he under deployment of some kind? And that's one question. And my other comment was, having been an investigator a long time, sketch artist drawings can be like a Mr. Potato Head sometimes. They're not even close to the stuff. So I think he's close enough in these pictures.
Yeah, and I got to tell you one more thing. Apparently there was more than one sketch artist involved because Tina, who flew with the hijacker down to Reno, she was interviewed separately and gave her own eyewitness account, and the other flight attendants, Florence Schaffner and Alice Hancock, never flew out of Seattle. They deboarded in Seattle, and they gave apparently a different artist, police sketch artist, their version. So you had 2 or 3, maybe even 4 witnesses. That would be Billy Mitchell, the kid who sat across the aisle from Cooper, up to 4 different aspects of what D.B. Cooper looked like to these various people. But apparently the descriptions are all relatively close.
Yeah.
My other question would be, was that a hand-drawn, or were they just using the layover strips that were popular in the 60s and 70s where they would just get as close as they could by flipping different strips in the book until the feature more or less matched?
Yeah, that's a technical question. I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
Again, might be great to track down the sketch artist on that. Thank you, Jim. As a musician friend of mine would have said, if he looked at the photograph and then the sketch artist is close enough for jazz, as he would say.
Don't forget that. Don't forget that fingerprint, Ian.
Yeah, and we haven't, because I'm going to get Chris in here, and then that's it. Chris, we just got to be quick here. Chris is in Houston. I want to leave the last few minutes to talk about the fingerprint that's up at the website at coasttocoastam.com. So, Chris, let's just keep the question short if we can.
All right. Well, I just wanted to ask him, DB Cooper took 2 parachutes, correct?
He took 2 out the door with him. That's correct.
Okay. Now, there was $200,000 worth of 20s. And that makes 1,000 20s. Now, I don't know what the weight capacity of a parachute is for a 28-foot canopy, but compared to the individual that was going to be parachuting, but couldn't he use the second parachute for the money? Because I'm not sure how much it
was
weighed.
It was sealed closed. It wasn't a functioning parachute. The $200,000 cash weighs about 22 pounds, and the flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, saw D.B. Cooper attach a rope to his waist, about a 6 to 8 foot tether line, with the money in a separate satchel, and he was going to use that as a tethering line to jump out of that airplane with.
All right, now let's go to that, and thank you, Chris, for that. Go down, take a look at coasttocoastam.com. If you do the link up to these new pieces offered by Galen Cook, you scroll down to the bottom and you see this right thumb print. We've given this, I'm sure, to the FBI. Do they have a matching thumbprint from the D.B. Coopers on the plane?
Here's the story I have. According to the FBI, there are 66 unidentifiable fingerprints on Flight 305. Presumably, some of those may be from D.B. Cooper, but the FBI isn't saying. I did talk with Agent Larry Carr, who's the lead agent now, and he said they do have fingerprints. So what I did was I went through all these military records, and I have more to come yet, but I found an interesting one, and you've got it on the website. This was taken in 1949, so the suspect would have been 19 years old. These were discharge papers of his service in the Army Air Force, and part of the discharge procedure required his signature and his right thumbprint, and it's a very good thumbprint, one of the best I've seen, and I've got several others of this suspect. So what I did was I sent along the latest photo and a picture and this impression or this right thumbprint and mailed it to the FBI. So they probably got it about the same time that you put it up on your web, Ian.
Okay, and now we have a photograph here, too, that we've included that you've blocked out the signature, but that would give another piece of evidence for the FBI if they have the original handwritten note.
They do not. They do not have it. Cooper demanded all the notes be returned to him. Cooper did his best to make sure that he didn't leave too much evidence behind.
That's pretty good.
But he might have left some DNA behind, though.
And that's what the FBI's indicated that they have something that they're holding up their sleeve, and so if we can use that as an indicator, then we might be able to say they might have, if they could determine, for example, in their DNA evidence whether or not the person they have DNA of was in blood group 0. Can they do that? Can they find out whether or not he's an O?
I'm not sure about that, but I will tell you this. The Sons all told me that if this investigation gets to that point, they will all submit DNA samples, and apparently that kind of determination can be made. So that's going to be the ace in the hole. But the fingerprint is good, and if this matches up with any of those 66 thumbprint or fingerprints that the FBI has, then we know my suspect was on Flight 305 that night.
We got to like that. All right, and then Tina Mucklow, we're still looking for anybody that knows of the former nun that was also a former flight attendant, and any other evidence that somebody might have about an accomplice or anything else. Give your address again so people can email you.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I would prefer that they go through Coast to Coast.
Okay, go to coasttocoastam.com. We'll leave it up to there. We'll be in touch. Thank you so much, Galen Cook. Looking forward to continuing the conversation and determining once and for all whether or not this is it. Could be eliminated. We'll let you know, and then we'll move on to the next suspect. And then we'll get to Monster Hunter coming up next. Thank you so much, Peter, for your patience. Next on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. And it's perfect for tonight's guest, the very patient Peter von Puttkamer, if we will talk about his exploits overseeing the Monster Hunters, just one of the many documentaries he works on. Great work. Want to hear his latest coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Hard to name a network that has not shown material from Peter von Puttkamer and the work that you've done over the last couple of years. Peter, for those people who may not see your resume as completely as I do, other than Monster Hunters, why don't you go over some of your better-known titles?
Sure. Hi, how you doing? I think the audience on your show would no doubt be familiar with Sasquatch Odyssey, The Hunt for Bigfoot, which has sort of become a bit of a classic now because featured the 4 old-time hunters of Bigfoot, Peter Byrne, Grover Krantz, Renee DeHenden, and John Green. And sadly, 2 of those gentlemen have since died since we did the show. But it's a great testament to those guys, and it's a lot of fun, and looks at Bigfoot culture, and examines the whole phenomenon.
Kind of the original 4 horsemen of the Sasquatch apocalypse.
Well, they're kind of loosely referred to as that by a couple of people in the show. The 4 horsemen of Sasquatchery. But that was bit of a early work on Bigfoot out there, and I've been making films for 25 years, and my films go back into the early 80s, and I'm working with Native Americans, producing shows for PBS, working with Native American filmmakers, in partnerships and creating some pretty important work in terms of their communities and cultural and spiritual practices. One of my early...
She estimates she has destroyed 15 tea kettles in the last few years. Housework is a problem, 20 irons, and 10 vacuum cleaners biting the dust after falling foul of her apparently supercharged touch. She's like Magneto without the helmet, I assume. Maybe she's got a helmet, too. And her friends and family are often left with hair standing on end after touching her. I should use that excuse. My wife asked me to vacuum. I should say, I'm sorry, I blow up vacuum cleaners. She also can't have a computer in her house, though, because they go berserk at the touch of her hand. You can find out more on that story online. I hope this woman is never allowed to wear corduroy pants. For God's sake, she could blow up half of England. And let's keep this statically charged grandmother out of Arizona, which is close to becoming the Persian Gulf of solar energy, according to CNN. A Spanish company is planning to take 3 square miles of desert southwest of Phoenix and turn them into one of the largest solar power plants in the world. The company, which has plants in Spain, Northern Africa, and other parts of the U.S., could begin construction as early as next year on this small, dusty town 50 miles southwest of Phoenix. The company said Thursday it could be online with solar energy by 2011. It's a $1 billion power plant. But again, like that, CNN describes it as the Persian Gulf of solar energy right here in the United States. Good thing that President Bush is leaving office, or we might end up having invaded ourselves somehow before it was over. Sorry. And then, speaking of Phoenix, the 600-page guide may lend credibility to UFO believers. It's in a story from a Phoenix TV station. You can find it at coasttocoastam.com. The Fire Officer's Guide to Disaster Control can apparently be found in firehouses across the U.S., though. It covers everything from fire and flood response to aviation disasters. Chapter 13 of the book has an unusual twist titled Enemy Attack and UFO Potential. It outlines what could happen in the event of a UFO crash. The authors of the book, retired firefighters, write in part, it would be remiss not to give some part to the role fire departments might play in the event of the unexpected arrival of UFOs in their communities. In a less optimistic scenario, you may have engine trouble upon approaching the scene. Radio contact could be deviated from established plans. Secret Service spokesman Eric Zarin said that there was no order from the Secret Service to stop screening people going to the Obama rally Wednesday at the Dallas Reunion Arena. He said that the event's security plans did not involve having each participant pass through a magnometer, as may be the case with other events. So he's saying the fact that a police officer said that they were told to no longer put people through the metal detectors isn't unusual, because he said there was no rule that said that they all had to go through the metal detectors. Anyway, they go on to say, the Secret Service, any allegations to the fact that we had suspended screening or deviated from the original security plan would be entirely inaccurate. But how familiar does that sound, huh? The Secret Service denies telling the Dallas police to stand down on its security of a potential, Kennedy-like president. Some guy like that. I don't know. And then the sad story of the police officer who was killed on the motorcycle. The only way this story could get weirder is if that police officer's last name had been Tippett. From Phys.org.com, now it is possible to see a movie of an electron. The movie shows how an electron rides on a light wave after just having been pulled away from an atom. This is the first time an electron has ever been filmed, and the results are presented in the latest issue of Physical Review Letters. As important as the electron is, and this is the first time it's appearing on film, makes you wonder, doesn't it? How is it that an electron is just getting on the screen and Pauly Shore has already made all those movies? It just doesn't seem right. And this new movie with the electron already made more money than Paris Hilton's The Hottie and the Naughty. Sorry. Did you hear about that movie? Paris Hilton's movie, The Hottie and the Naughty, and its opening weekend, opening in like 2,000 theaters, made $9,000 or something. Some amazingly low amount. I'm sure they didn't cover that in physical review letters. That's where this story is from. We've linked it up at the website, coasttocoastam.com. Physical review letters. Sounds like Penthouse Forum for scientists, doesn't it? Online tonight at the Daily Mail, also at the website, the story of Mavis Price. She's the 60-year-old grandmother who seems to have a freakishly high level of static electricity coursing through her veins. Well, thank you, Trevor Oliver, and to Tom Danheiser, and most importantly to Bob Fukuda, who's the market director for engineering at Clear Channel Chicago, for getting me up on the air tonight on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett with a face for radio and a voice for print. I'll tell you this right off the bat. I did not want to miss this show tonight. Not just because this is the kind of show I would love to listen to, but because it's just so much fun to do. And even though I'm on the road in Chicago, we were able to pull it together to get a studio on so that we didn't have to miss this one. And it's going to be so interesting to get this update from Galen Cook. Now, you might remember Galen Cook has been on with us a couple of times now, and together we're kind of tracking down the true identity of D.B. Cooper, using the massive resources of Coast to Coast AM and Galen Cook, who is a former investigator, now a lawyer in Washington State. We started the show back in Thanksgiving weekend with a visit with Galen Cook on the weekend anniversary of the successful skyjacking of D.B. Cooper. And then we got a phone call from a family who said, you know what, that's Dad. And Galen Cook, who had already had a suspect that he liked a lot, even changed, had a 180, and was seriously looking at this particular suspect being offered by his family, because the man had passed and he had told individual members of his family that he was, in fact, D.B. Cooper, and showed them evidence to that effect. And the pictures say a lot. In fact, we'll get more on that coming up this hour on the website. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. But we're going to put something up on the website at coasttocoastam.com, a new photo where you can really see the similarities between the man whom the FBI identified as D.B. Cooper and this man who as of now shall remain nameless. But we'll talk more about that with Galen Cook and what more he's been able to figure out on this story. Plus, coming up a little bit later on in the show, Peter Von Puttkamer. He is the producer of at Griffin Productions. They do a lot of documentaries. He's been on the road investigating everything from Bigfoot to giant tarantulas to being in, these amazing caves to hunted circumstances to where people are doing the most bizarre things. And be lost with your dispatcher. If at night your headlights could go out, the city could be blacked out, and your portable generators may malfunction when you attempt to use them for fans and portable lights. For the sake of the first responders, I hope Chapter 14 of this manual is how not to get vaporized by their alien death rays. Because that always seems to happen in those movies. Remember, they like turn green, they glow, and then they're gone. And if you take a look online, I'll try and get the blog up a little bit later on this hour, too. Our guest is ready. Galen Cook is standing by with another breaking story. Well, at least of sorts, anyway. It's not the breaking story that we want, though, Galen, yet. The one where we take it to the FBI and we've proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that we know who D.B. Cooper is. But we're getting closer, aren't we?
Absolutely. By the way, pleasure to be back on your show, Ian.
I love having you on. I cannot wait to do this, because I think there is something about this story that seems so plausible. But you are our investigator in the field on this, Galen, so let's start from the beginning. You're talking about somebody that you like as being your prime suspect for D.B. Cooper. Then you were contacted by this family. Is the family still remaining nameless?
At this time, yes, and I want to compliment them. There's basically the widow and then three sons. The three sons are not related to the widow. The widow was a wife that came down the line later. But
a stepmom.
That's correct. But They've been coordinating with me, and we're doing this slowly and methodically. The family does not have an agenda, but they would like to know the truth, and that's why we're working steadily on this thing. And by the way, I don't know if you put it up on the website yet, but the latest evidence that I gave you is the exact same evidence I gave the FBI. So you and your listeners have the same thing the FBI has right now on this suspect.
All right, so we have a photo which is coming up in a few minutes, and that'll go up at coasttocoastam.com. Mm-hmm. And this is a new photo that also looks remarkably like the photo of the drawing made by the FBI's sketch artist.
That's correct. Actually, there's about 3 or 4, and I can't tell you which exactly. It's either 3 or 4 artist renderings that were produced in 1971 and 1972 of the suspect.
And, he's also been involved in these native rituals and every possible activity out there on the fringe. He's not only seen it, but he's participated in it, and we'll tell you more about his latest monster hunting expeditions coming up on Coast to Coast AM. Looking forward to that. But let's get started with some amazing crypto news. I think the most incredible story of this week, and it all sounds so familiar, plus the story of the manual which instructs firefighters on how to deal with a UFO invasion. Maybe you saw that tonight on the website. We'll tell you more about it in crypto news next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Again, Galen Cook with an important update coming up on the D.B. Cooper story, and I'm really loving where this is going. Wouldn't it be cool if we were able to break this story on Coast to Coast and finally solve the mystery of who was D.B. Cooper? We'll bring you up to speed on that coming up a little bit later on. First, in crypto news for tonight. By the way, can you hear me okay? Can you hear the thumping of the hip-hop music in the background? No one can hear that? I'm so glad. I'm doing this broadcast from a studio which is right next door to a late-night hip-hop station, which has a live DJ in the studio, and he's doing the whole McMaster thing with the discs flying. He's got 2 vinyl turntables going, and it's cool to watch. But he's really cranking the music up, and he's dancing, and there's all these people dancing literally about 8 feet from me, but it's separated by a wall and soundproof glass. I can feel the floor underneath me going thump, 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 thump. And I can even hear it when I take off my headphones, but apparently it's not coming through the processing, so we're in good shape. But if you were sitting there next to me, I swear it'd be like being next to an apartment filled with a bunch of college kids going ape on some band I've never heard of that's already won 9 Grammys. You know how that works. All right, so as far as I'm concerned, the weirdest news story of this week in crypto news, the reports that the Secret Service waived their protection of Barack Obama in Dallas. Now, that was the claim made by a police officer who went on the record to say he was told to stop screening people and let them come on in. Had you heard this update, though, that the U.S. Secret Service Friday denied reports that security measures at this Obama rally in Texas were relaxed or